The Game Awards sort of act as the gaming industry's version of the Grammys or Oscars. The obvious attention grabber for the Game Awards is the award announcements for dev teams and their games. The big one, obviously, being the Game of the Year. For 2024, it came down to these 6 games: Astrobot, Balatro, Black Myth Wukong, Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and Metaphor ReFantasio. Now, I won't go into my full thoughts on this lineup here, but out of these games, I only had played Astrobot. I thought it was an amazing game, but I genuinely thought it had zero chance of winning. All of the new games I played in 2024 felt like they didn't stand a chance. My gut was telling me Black Myth Wukong or Shadow of the Erdtree would take home the award. However...
And the Game of the Year is... Astrobot!
The first time the Game Awards has named a platformer as the Game of the Year and it's not from Nintendo, that's sort of Mario's bread and butter. So this has to be something special, right? Well, I actually think so. Astrobot is a 3D platformer developed by Team Asobi that launched as a PS5 exclusive. Team Asobi has been the Astrobot team since 2013. Yeah, this team has been making games about the little guy for over 10 years. Team Asobi made both 2013's The Playroom and 2016's The Playroom VR, both which acted as minigame showcases for different pieces of PlayStation 4 add-on tech. The Playroom for the PlayStation Camera and The Playroom VR for PlayStation VR. The Playroom VR was actually the debut of Astrobot as a character, as he appeared in the minigame Robot Rescue. The minigame would actually grow into a fully fleshed out PlayStation VR game called Astrobot Rescue Mission. Now, to be 100% honest, I haven't played either the Playroom or Rescue Mission. My family had a PlayStation VR, but their dog ended up chewing through the cables as a pup, so there wasn't much of an opportunity to play either of those games. And I really don't feel like investing in a PlayStation VR is worth it. So I don't know much about Astrobot's history during these games, so there may be nods or references in Astrobot I don't pick up on. Regardless, you can see a lot of what Astrobot would become here. The PlayStation 5 released with the tech demo pre-installed on the consoles. This tech demo was a showcase of the PlayStation 5 and its controller. This, of course, was Astro's Playroom. It's similar to all the previous Playroom games that acted as showcases for accessories for the PS4, just with more game. Think similar to the Wii and Wii Sports, just with less. Astro's Playroom is the closest thing to Astrobot, mostly thanks to very similar playstyles. But this is still a showcase for the PS5 and not its own full release. However, it would tease Astrobot. Leading up to the release of Astrobot, 4 special and very hard to find bots based on characters from Bloodborne, Ape Escape, Gran Turismo, and Returnal were all added as secrets. There are also tons of cameo bots from all sorts of games hidden throughout Astro's Playroom, some directly from PlayStation's IPs and some just from series that have heavy ties with the platform in the past. This is a concept that would get retooled in Astrobot. In fact, that's kind of the story that sets up Astrobot. Astrobot's narrative is super simple. A little alien dude, Nebulax, steals the CPU from the spaceship PlayStation 5. This causes the ship to crash and all of Astrobot's buddies get scattered, as well as other parts of the PS5. So that then is the goal. Set off to recover the missing parts and rescue the bots that got scattered. Again, the story is super simple, but it's a good enough reason to go explore different worlds and go beat up some green slime bag. This is pretty much the same story that Astrobot Rescue Mission follows, just instead of a PS5 ship having its CPU stolen, it's a VR ship having its headset screen thing stolen. While the bots that are lost in Rescue Mission are a bunch of generic bots, the ones in Astrobot consist of both generic bots and cameo bots, similar to the ones in Astro's Playroom. Much like those bots found in Astro's Playroom, a lot of these are PlayStation-owned characters, but a good chunk of them are characters from games that had a decent presence on PlayStation platforms. Some of these characters genuinely caught me off guard. Like, of course Ratchet is going to be here. But Richter Belmont? There's even a good chunk I didn't even recognize because of how niche their respective games have become. There is an argument to be made about these little dudes. It's amazing that they're all here, seeing Cosmic Kiryu, Chris Redfield, Jack and Daxter, Snake, and Soul Bad Guy is awesome. But does that constant flow of cameos take away from the greater picture? Am I just being hyped because I like these characters? Is this game actually fun? Well, I kind of already answered this. The game is amazing, with or without the cameo bots. These cameos and references serve as a celebration to PlayStation's history. PlayStation celebrated its 30th anniversary the same year Astrobot came out, so why not make it a grand celebration? It reminds us of the great times we had with other series and introduces us to new ones. a lot of which can be played on the PlayStation 5. You see these goofy dudes and wonder what they came from. Find out they're from Ape Escape, that's on PlayStation Store. There you go, a new game to play. It's the same sort of effect Smash can have on franchises. I wouldn't know who Marth or the Fire Emblem series were if I never played Melee, and now Fire Emblem is a series I can say I'm a fan of. Now Astrobot has me playing Ape Escape, just like Smash got me playing Fire Emblem. Actually rescuing the bots is pretty fun. For the most part, it's just a matter of finding where the bot is located and kicking them into the controller where they'll hide until the level is completed. You can actually leave the level after rescuing a bot and not complete the level. This is really handy for going back to levels where you missed a bot early on, or if you need to just grab an extra bot to open something. The number of bots you have can open up boss levels or things in the hub area. The hub, or the crash site, is an area where all the bots chill after you rescue them. They all hang out around your ship while it's being fixed. You can call all the bots together to come help with tasks like lifting boulders, creating bridges, and pushing large objects. You can also take pictures with them, and even dance. The VIP bots also have items that can be given to them to give them a little bit more interactivity, so they aren't just standing around. A lot of these will have the VIP bot interact with some sort of element from their game, like Ratchet getting his buddy Clank, or the Wipeout pilots getting their ships. These items are all found in the Gacha Lab. This is where you can spend your coins in a gacha machine to get those items. It's completely random, so if you're going after something specific for a trophy or a character you really like, then it may take some time. However, it does seem like some types of items in the Gacha Lab may be prioritized. Aside from items for the VIP bots, there are also costumes for Astrobot and paint jobs for the Dual Speeder. Oh, so that's where Bloodborne 2 went. However, to get these, the other collectible must be collected. That other collectible comes in the form of puzzle pieces. Collecting these will fill out puzzles in the crash site to unlock facilities. The Gacha Lab is unlocked after collecting 16 of these, Dual Speeder Garage after 32, the Changing Room after 48, Safari Park after 64, and the Grand Master Challenge at the very end after collecting all 120. The pieces themselves are pretty similar to bots in terms of how they're hidden and collected, which honestly makes them a little less fun to collect. Yes, they give you something different to look forward to aside from just adding more to the horde, but sometimes they feel a bit unnecessary. A lot of the time the puzzle pieces are just off the side of the main path and act as a brief challenge. There's only once or twice they ever really felt like a pain. They just don't have that flair that even the standard bot would have. Astrobot's actual gameplay comes off as super straightforward at first. It's an atypical platformer, so you run and jump with your punch acting as your form of combat. What is a little different about Astro's moveset than just your standard platformer is Astro's ability to hover and spin. The hover sort of acts as a second jump, but also gives Astrobot a bit more control in the air. This is done by firing lasers from the feet of Astrobot. Not only does this do damage to enemies, but it also helps visualize where the player will land. I think this is really awesome. A lot of platformers stick to the shadow of the character, just going right beneath the character, and Astrobot does do that, but with the more in-depth lighting and textures, the shadow can blend in with some of the environments. This laser is an awesome way to make that trajectory more clear. The other thing I mentioned, the spin, is a charged punch. While colliding with enemies or breakable objects, the spin is more like rapid-fire punches, but it can also act as a drill to dig in certain areas or as a way to make objects spin. These sound like such little things, but it really goes far in terms of giving Astrobot more to do on his own. That is, while not supported by one of Astro's extra abilities. There's the octopus that can let Astrobot jump into a balloon to float around and gain extra height. The frog that acts as boxing gloves, extending Astrobot's punches and allowing them to stick to jelly so they can swing around and pull objects. The bulldog that launches Astrobot forward so he can break through some walls and fly across gaps. The monkey that lets Astrobot climb, throw stuff, and slam on the ground. The mouse shrinks Astrobot. The elephant can suck different liquids up to create platforms with. The chicken is a vertical version of the dog, letting Astro launch himself into the air. The penguin assists with swimming. The bear has symbols that create sound waves. The sponge that lets Astro absorb water to grow huge, as well as splash water on fires or other objects. The VR headset can slow time, and the iron suit lets Astrobot turn into a metal ball that is completely impervious to damage. These extra abilities show up occasionally in specific stages. They spice up the gameplay a loop, but don't completely change the game. And there's obviously a large amount of them, so if there's one that you're not a fan of, then chances are you won't have to deal with them too much throughout the game. That being said, it does kinda suck how underused some of these are. The mouse ability only shows up in a single base game level, but it is so cool. This is one of those things where the power of the generation really shows. Being able to go tiny on the fly without having to hit a loading screen is so fun. And they do it once. The sponge ability is also one that's only used once. And again, it's just a fun idea. Mixing in a strengthened up Astrobot with some puzzles that require water is an interesting combo, and I definitely feel they could have come up with some more levels with this power-up in mind. Each world has a boss fight near the end that puts these abilities to the test, and boy do these fights not only get brutal, but they kind of get intense too. Not to say they're super hard or anything, they're a fair challenge all things considered. They're actually pretty good tests of skill. But there's stuff like the first boss tearing apart buildings and even the stage to attack you. So you punch him in the eyes and break his teeth. Or the fourth boss that spits saw blades at you, and after running on top of them, you go and wail on his uvula while time stopped. Astrobot takes his friendship seriously. Don't mess with his pals or you'll end up like this. I know I've already talked about the bots enough, but I just want to say how brilliant of a design they are. The basic bot is super adorable and recognizable, but give one any sort of flair and they simply become another character, and it works perfectly. This allows on a technical side of things for the basic framework for any character to already exist. Does a character have a weirdly shaped body? Then give it a suit. Does a character have a strangely shaped head? Then give it a mask or helmet. Is the character the protagonist of the game you're playing? Give it some blue accents and a cape. Of course, there are some strangely shaped bots, but these are often put to the side and have a little less interactability. This is fine though, because the devs still put a ton of detail into even these bots. Opposing the bots are a bunch of different enemies. There are the previously mentioned world bosses, 6 of them including Nebulax, but then there are some stage bosses as well, like the Tama Trio or Ginny. Sometimes these bosses can come off as a little more difficult than the world bosses. For me, it was just because the world bosses give you extra health, then you can get hit an extra 2 times before dying. Stage bosses stick to the single hit that the rest of the game gives you. The single hit system works for the game because of how abundant checkpoints are, but in specific cases these rather basic foes can put up a good challenge. Whether it was their positioning, their abundance, or their scarily good aim, there were a good chunk of times where one of the bad guys popped me like a balloon. Like I had just mentioned, the checkpoints are rather abundant throughout the game, but their spacing was still far enough I feel there could have been a bit of a warp system in place. So far it would sound like there wouldn't be a need for something like this, but there are a couple instances where backtracking would become impossible in the stage due to stage elements changing or large jumps being made. It would really suck getting a bot or a puzzle piece only to find out there were some that I had missed in a part of the stage that I could no longer access. That or finding one of the secret exits and having to completely redo the stage from the beginning so I can get the bots that were beyond the secret exit. Secret exits unlock extra stages, and it makes sense they would work in this way, warping Astrobot to a planet that was hidden. But I feel like these easily could have been something else, like a switch or a button that when hit would open up a spot on the map where the hidden stage would be, rather than warping you out and forcing you to redo parts of the previous stage. This is more of a complaint for completionists, as you don't really need to get everything in a stage, nor do you have to do every stage, but getting all these cool VIP bots and filling out those puzzles are really fun, so I can imagine more people on average would plan on at least getting through these stages. There are more of these special transformation-esque power-ups than the ones I mentioned. After beating each world, a special VIP bot is rescued that represents a different era of PlayStation's history. These bots, after being saved, will lead you to another level entirely themed around that game. In these levels, you'll get an item that will change Astrobot's appearance to be like that character and give them similar abilities from their home game. The levels are based on Ape Escape, representing the PlayStation 1, God of War, representing the PlayStation 2, even though it's clearly taking more from the 2018 game in Ragnarok, Uncharted, representing the PS3, Loco Roco, representing the PSP, and Horizon, representing the PS4. Out of these levels, I feel like Ape Escape was the best. Kept the flow going, and it really kicked it up a notch in terms of what Astrobot already had set up with his formula, just adding some Ape Escape flair. The God of War and Loco Roco stages, they spice things up to a perfect amount here. The Hidden Ravens in the God of War stage add an extra element of exploration, but are totally optional for those who want to blast through the level. And the Loco Roco stage is short enough to where change controls don't overstay their welcome. And the Uncharted level is fine. That gun feels mindless, and it's not the most engaging of the power-ups, but the second half of the stage is really fun, and feels more like what I would expect. Then there's the Horizon stage. Maybe because I'm not super familiar with the source material, but I really didn't enjoy the stage. It's actually the only stage in the entire game that sticks out in my mind as being something I didn't like. I know for sure I didn't like the bow and arrow, so by extension the final chase with the T-Rex didn't strike anything special with me. When you finish these levels, you get parts for your ship. The game has these cute little bits where you actually put it back together like you're fixing a real PS5. All that's left at this point is the CPU. That's still in the hands of the alien dude. So what's left is the final fight then. The final stage has Astrobot and the Play Squadron take action for their fight, launching into space aboard their PlayStation-themed ships. The whole stage is a bonkers space shooter stage with all sorts of PlayStation love flying about. The theme that plays during this part is straight up from Thunder Force 5, which is nuts to me, but it's also totally fitting. This final chunk is amazing. It's such a grand love letter to PlayStation as a whole. It's such a great end to this. Hell, even the last part of the stage, the final boss, takes place on top of a PS5. Not that you would be able to tell at a glance, since this thing looks like a white plate when it's on its side. This is all just stupid fun. The final boss himself is fun too. You cycle between different power-ups and then take out Nebulax once and for all. When it's all said and done, you can go back and round up any missing bots or puzzle pieces. And in case you didn't see them, there's a couple bonus and challenge stages to be found. The best of them being the face challenge stages. These stages are loosely themed around the face buttons on PlayStation controllers. Square, triangle, cross, and circle. These are some of the hardest levels in the game, so if you're looking for a challenge, go give it a shot. After all of the bots and puzzle pieces are found, there's one final challenge. A longer and more difficult challenge to really test the player's skills. Completing the stage nets the player a special retro skin and one final bot. With that finally done, there's still more. The devs over at Team Asobi just keep giving more and more to their fans. After release, there have been a couple free updates that have added more VIP bots and a couple new stages, some of which being speedrunner stages that are designed specifically to be mastered. These are a great highlight of the free content they've added, because these alone add a good chunk of replayability to an already completed save. PlayStation's titles leading up to Astrobot have noticeably become a bit stale. Not to say that the recent God of War or Horizon games are bad, but when the large focus is on the visuals for several titles in a row, it feels a bit boring. Sure, there is a Ratchet & Clank thrown in there every now and then, but even Rift Apart felt like it was an excuse to show off how pretty games can be on the PS5. Again, this isn't a total problem, but it can leave games feeling stale. Astrobot feels totally fresh in that regard. A gameplay style that focuses on fun over making things look quote-unquote beautiful. Astrobot still is a great looking game, but they use the power of the PS5 to have things like the mouse power-up, or all these little interactables on the ground. Not a stutter in sight, and there are elements flying all about. Honestly, a similar thing can be said about the soundtrack. Instead of going for the more epic movie-sounding score that a lot of games have been going for, Astrobot has some really good video game tunes. Standouts for me were Trapped in Time, Broken Bridge, and Perseverance. Honestly, even the title screen is a good little tune, even if it is Astrobot telling us what his name is for the 100th time. With Astrobot being on the PS5, there comes some added benefits of being able to play with the DualSense controller. It's got those adaptive triggers and the gyro controls as well. The triggers are mostly used in the power-up abilities, and the gyro can be used to steer the controller that Astrobot rides on at the beginning of some stages. In the settings, you can turn off the gyro stuff so you can aim and move things with the left stick, which is awesome. I prefer some elements of the game like this. Not enough to change the settings, but it's nice that it's there. However, you can't change a lot of the other settings, including the adaptive triggers. I actually prefer to play a lot of games without adaptive triggers. My reasoning is a little silly. I was sick when I got Resident Evil Village, and the adaptive triggers made my hands feel weird. But for some reason I can't shake that feeling whenever I feel the triggers do that resistance thing. This does lead to my largest issues with Astrobot though. That being the lack of settings and options. What they have here are some of the big ones. The adaptive triggers should be here, but it really isn't a huge problem that they aren't able to be toggled. However, not having sound settings sort of shocks me, especially with how Astrobot handles its audio. And for the most part, Astrobot's audio mixing is pretty good, until you realize that a lot of the audio comes out of the controller, but there's no in-game setting to turn it up or down, or just have sound come out of the TV instead. You have to adjust it in the PlayStation 5's menus. This does make me wonder if it's more of a limitation caused by how the PS5 is set up to handle controller audio, but it does still sort of suck. I feel like I was nitpicking a bit there, but in all fairness, if my biggest complaint is the settings, I think we're on a good path. The movement is tight, the soundtrack is amazing, and the game looks fantastic. It's a great package, and you know what? It released at $59.99 USD, at a time where most AAA games release at $69.99 USD. Another thing that's not a big deal, but It's just cool. It's honestly really hard to talk bad about this game, or Astrobot in general. The Playroom introduced us to the bots, Playroom VR gave us Astrobot himself and set up the initial direction the actual games would take, Astrobot Rescue Mission fleshed out the gameplay ideas in a broader spectrum, Astro's Playroom solidified Astro as a pseudo-mascot for the PlayStation, and further developed the groundwork for the levels and gimmicks. Then finally, Astrobot brought it all together, making it a fun experience for those new to gaming and those who have been playing for years. It's like giving several teasers for years and years and then finally having this amazing prize for waiting all this time. It's actually kind of cool to look back in those older games to see those bits and pieces that would fall into place for Astrobot. It all came together for this. One hell of a PlayStation party.